Fire. I hate fire. It surrounded me like a wild beast, the scorching heat wrapping around my body. The laboratory felt suffocating to the point where I could barely breathe. I lay on the cold floor, blood from the cut on my leg pooling beneath me, staining the white tiles. Thick smoke billowed, obscuring my vision. But no matter how dense it was, I could still see clearly. Daniel Tran was kneeling in front of Lily Nguyen, carefully lifting her up. His hands trembled slightly, his eyes filled with nothing but concern for her. "Daniel, save me," Lily whispered weakly, as if she was about to faint. I watched that scene, but instead of feeling despair or pain, I laughed. A cold, bitter laugh. Right here, in this very place, in my previous life, I had called Daniel's name countless times, but he never once looked at me. "Emily, if it weren't for you, Lily wouldn't have ended up like this. What you're suffering now is the price you must pay." His words pierced my heart like a knife. Daniel said that. He said it as I knelt at his feet, my body covered in burns and blood. He watched me die slowly, without even the slightest hesitation. I died in this fire. Boom! A loud explosion echoed in my mind, pulling me out of my thoughts. I opened my eyes. It was the same laboratory. The fire still raged, consuming everything in sight. But this time, something was different. I wasn't dead. Daniel was still holding Lily, and I had returned. Is this reincarnation? My heart pounded against my chest, a mix of disbelief and shock flooding over me. This wasn't a dream. Everything felt real. I could feel the searing pain from the wound on my leg. I had come back to this exact day. The day Daniel chose Lily and left me to burn. Number I wouldn't let history repeat itself. I clenched my trembling fists. The fire scorched nearby, but my mind was clearer than ever. From the other side of the room, a familiar voice rang out. "Daniel, are you crazy? Save Emily first. She's your girlfriend." It was Sophie Joe. I turned toward the door and saw Sophie desperately trying to rush into the flames. Daniel didn't even glance at me. His voice was calm, indifferent. "Emily's fine. Lily is more important." I laughed, not out of sadness, but out of realization. Yes, that's exactly how it was before. If I hadn't revealed that I was the daughter of the hospital director, Daniel wouldn't have saved me. Lily was the only person he cared about. Blood dripped from my leg onto the floor, but I didn't care. I looked straight at Daniel and Lily, my gaze cold and unwavering. "Sophie, don't come in. This place is going to explode soon. You need to leave now." Sophie froze. "Emily, what are you talking about?" "Run," I shouted, my voice echoing through the lab. Daniel hesitated, turning his head slightly to look at me, doubt flickering in his eyes. "Emily, how do you know this place is about to explode?" I didn't answer. I dragged my injured leg, moving slowly toward the door. Each step sent a sharp pain through me, but I gritted my teeth and kept going. In my previous life, the explosion happened exactly 15 minutes after the fire started. I remembered it clearly. It was the moment I collapsed for the last time. This time, I wouldn't wait for Daniel to come back. I would save myself. Behind me, Lily's weak voice echoed again. "Daniel, I can't take it anymore." In an instant, Daniel lifted her and rushed out of the fire. Just like before. I stopped walking, watching his figure disappear into the smoke. This time, I felt nothing. If anything, I felt determination, a fire even stronger than the one around me. "Daniel, I won't die so easily this time, and I won't let you get away with it." I dragged myself out of the laboratory, the heat from the fire searing my back as if trying to pull me in. Every step sent pain shooting through my leg, but I gritted my teeth and pushed forward. I won't die this time. I'll survive. Just as I reached the hallway, an explosion roared behind me. The force slammed me against the wall, and my head struck the cold, hard surface. "Emily!" I heard Sophie Joe's panicked voice moments before I felt her hands gripping my arms, pulling me upright. She knelt beside me, her face pale with worry. "You're hurt. Let me get you out of here." I managed a faint smile and shook my head. "I'm fine. We need to leave before the next explosion." Outside the hospital, firefighters worked frantically to contain the flames. Hospital staff gathered nearby, whispering among themselves, eyes fixed on the burning building. Daniel stood at the front of the crowd, cradling Lily in his arms. She looked weak, but I knew better. A few minor scratches wouldn't bring Lily down. If anything, she thrived under the attention Daniel lavished on her. I leaned against Sophie, trying to steady my breathing. "Daniel, Lily, you left me to die for your own ambitions, but this time I won't let you walk away unscathed. At the hospital." I lay in the hospital bed, my leg wrapped in bandages and my head still throbbing. Sophie sat by my side, arms crossed and eyes blazing with anger. "Daniel is unbelievable. How could he just leave you in there like that?" I gazed out the window, the weight of her words settling over me. "I'll never forget this, and I won't forgive him." Sophie's eyes narrowed. "What are you going to do?" I turned to her, a cold smile curling on my lips. "Revenge?" The next day, Daniel and Lily came to visit, plastering on their usual fake smiles as if nothing had happened. "Emily, I'm glad to see you're doing better," Daniel said, gently placing his hand over mine. I immediately pulled my hand away, my eyes locking onto his with cold disdain. "Stop pretending, Daniel. We both know you left me there." Daniel looked startled but recovered quickly. Lily, standing at his side, placed a soft hand on his arm, her gaze full of false sympathy. "Emily, don't blame Daniel. He was just trying to protect me. You understand, right?" I let out a soft laugh. "Lily, you've always been great at playing the victim, but this time, I'm not falling for it." 1 week later, I returned to the hospital, but I was no longer the Emily who quietly endured everything. I began collecting information. Every day, I delved deeper into Daniel and Lily's past, things I had ignored or overlooked before. Sophie was the first to notice the change in me. "Emily, what exactly are you doing?" I turned to her, my eyes filled with resolve. "Sophie, do you trust me?" Without hesitation, she nodded. "Then help me. I need evidence against Lily, everything we can find." Sophie hesitated briefly before offering a reassuring smile. "I'm with you, Emily." I gripped her hand, feeling grateful for her unwavering loyalty. In my past life, Sophie had risked everything to save me. This time, I wouldn't let her down. That night, I stepped out of the hospital and saw Daniel laughing with Lily near the parking lot. They stood close, whispering as if nothing in the world could touch them. I walked past without saying a word, but the fire inside me burned brighter than ever. "Daniel, you chose this path. Don't blame me for what happens next." Late at night, the hospital was silent, save for the occasional footsteps echoing down the corridors. I sat alone in my office, the blue light from my computer screen casting shadows across the room. My fingers moved swiftly over the keyboard, pulling up files, digging deeper into Lily's past. Lily Nguyen, graduated with honors, but I narrowed my eyes. Her records looked perfect, too perfect. "What are you doing?" I looked up to see Sophie leaning over my shoulder, her eyes flicking across the screen. "I'm looking into Lily. Remember that research project last year? Her name was listed as the lead, but I distinctly recall Lily never stepping foot in the lab during the entire process." Sophie paused, her brows furrowed. "You're right, but no one questioned it. Are you planning to bring that up now?" I smirked, eyes never leaving the screen. "Not just bring it up, I'm going to expose her." A few days later, an opportunity presented itself sooner than I expected. The hospital was hosting a medical conference, allowing researchers to present their work. Naturally, Lily was one of the highlighted speakers. Daniel stood proudly beside her as if she were some kind of rising star. I sat in the back row with Sophie, calmly watching the stage. "Emily, are you sure about this? If we make a mistake, it could come back to haunt us." I sipped my coffee, My gaze locked on Lily. Don't worry, I'm sure. Lily won't escape this time. Lily stepped onto the stage, the spotlight illuminating her carefully chosen dress and confident smile. She began discussing a pharmaceutical project, one that I knew all too well. It was my project. Excuse me, Lily. I stood up, interrupting her mid-sentence. The entire auditorium fell silent, all eyes turning to me. Daniel frowned, glancing at Lily with concern. Emily, what are you doing? Lily asked, keeping her voice calm, but I noticed her grip tightening around the podium. I walked closer to the stage, my voice carrying through the hall. I just have one question. Lily, can you explain the final step of the testing process? The one you personally handled? Lily blinked, her composure slipping for just a moment before she regained her fake confidence. Of course, it was a straightforward procedure. She began to explain, vaguely, skimming over details, but I knew she was bluffing. From the corner of my eye, I saw Sophie smirk. She's done for. After the conference, I left the auditorium, but I wasn't surprised to hear footsteps following me. Emily! Daniel's voice rang out as he caught up to me in the hallway. Why did you do that? You humiliated Lily in front of everyone. I crossed my arms, meeting his gaze head-on. Daniel, you honestly believe Lily completed that project? Or are you just choosing to look the other way? Daniel hesitated, his confidence wavering. Emily, I think you've changed. You were never this ruthless. I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Yes, I have. And it's thanks to you and Lily. I walked away, leaving Daniel standing in the empty corridor. My first step into the darkness had been taken. That night, Lily stormed into my office, slamming the door behind her. Emily, what the hell was that? Are you trying to destroy me? I leaned back in my chair, calm and collected. I'm just revealing the truth, Lily. Don't worry, this is just the beginning. Lily's hands balled into fists, her eyes narrowing with rage. Daniel will never come back to you, no matter what you do. I laughed softly. I don't need Daniel. I'm not trying to win him back, Lily. I'm here to take back everything you stole from me. Lily glared at me for a long moment before storming out. I watched her leave, the flames of determination burning brighter than ever. Lily, this war has only just begun. I knew Lily wouldn't stay silent after being exposed. Someone like her, someone who thrived on manipulation, would never leave the battlefield without a fight. The rumors started circulating within days. Whispers filled the hospital halls, drifting from one department to the next. I heard Emily was responsible for the lab explosion. They say she was careless, and now she's blaming Lily. Can you believe she tried to sabotage Lily's career? I stood by the window in my office, sipping coffee as I listened to the hushed voices outside my door. Sowing doubt, classic Lily. That afternoon, Sophie barged into my office, fuming. Have you heard what people are saying? Lily's spreading lies about you. I set my cup down calmly, my fingers tapping lightly against the desk. I expected this. Sophie's eyes widened. Emily, this isn't just gossip. Lily's filing a formal complaint with the hospital board. She's accusing you of negligence. I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. Let her. Sophie blinked. What? Are you serious? I smiled, the cold calculation in my mind piecing everything together. Sophie, Lily is desperate. She's striking blindly, hoping to catch me off guard. But she doesn't realize. I've already set the trap. 3 days later, I walked into the boardroom where an emergency meeting had been called. The tension in the air was palpable. Lily sat at the far end of the table, Daniel by her side. She kept her head high, her expression composed. Daniel, however, looked far less certain. His eyes flickered nervously toward me as I took my seat. At the head of the table sat my father, Dr. Richard Chen, the hospital's director. His gaze swept across the room before settling on Lily. Lily, I understand you've raised concerns regarding the lab incident. Lily stood gracefully, her voice soft but clear. Yes, sir. I believe there may have been some discrepancies in the evidence presented during the last meeting. I suspect the video that implicated me was altered. I held back a smirk. Of course, she would try to discredit the footage. You're claiming the security footage was tampered with? My father asked, raising an eyebrow. Lily nodded. I wouldn't make such an accusation without reason. I believe Emily may have manipulated the evidence to frame me. A murmur ran through the room. Daniel leaned forward, adding, I reviewed the footage with Lily. There were inconsistencies. I watched him carefully, but his voice lacked conviction. Even Daniel wasn't entirely sure of what he was saying. Emily, do you have anything to say in response? My father asked, turning his attention to me. I calmly placed a USB drive on the table. I do. This drive contains the unedited footage directly from the hospital's main server. No one can alter or delete it. Lily's confidence visibly wavered as I passed the drive to my father. If Lily is certain the footage was altered, let's play this version for everyone. The room fell silent as the video began to play. Lily's figure appeared on the screen, moving stealthily through the lab. The footage captured her clearly pouring liquid into the experiment, then exiting moments before the explosion. As the video ended, all eyes turned toward Lily. Lily, do you still claim this footage is fabricated? My father asked, his tone colder than before. Lily's hands trembled slightly. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Daniel shifted uncomfortably beside her. Mistakes happen, he said cautiously. Surely this doesn't warrant destroying Lily's career. I stood up, fixing my gaze on Daniel. Mistakes happen, Daniel, but this wasn't a mistake. It was sabotage. She nearly killed me. Daniel lowered his eyes, unable to refute the truth. The meeting concluded shortly after. Lily was suspended indefinitely pending further investigation. As we left the boardroom, Sophie walked beside me, her tone triumphant. Emily, you nailed her. Lily's career is over. I glanced toward the far end of the hall, where Lily and Daniel lingered, whispering to one another. Not yet, I replied quietly. Lily's not the type to give up that easily. Sophie frowned. You think she's planning something else? I nodded. Lily's cornered, and that makes her more dangerous than ever. Later that evening, as I left the hospital, I spotted Lily standing near the parking lot, waiting for me. Her expression was calm, but her eyes were sharp. Emily, she called out as I approached my car. I stopped, folding my arms across my chest. What do you want, Lily? She smiled faintly. You think you've won, don't you? I tilted my head, returning her gaze with equal intensity. Haven't I? Lily's smile faded, her voice lowering to a cold whisper. I know you're past, Emily, and if I'm going down, I'll make sure you go with me. I took a step closer, meeting her challenge head-on. Lily, you've already lost, and whatever you think you know, it won't work this time. Lily stared at me for a long moment before turning away. We'll see. I watched as she disappeared into the night, but the uneasy feeling lingered. Lily wasn't finished yet. I sat in my office the next morning, a heavy envelope resting on my desk. No name, no return address. When I opened it, my heart sank. Inside were copies of my psychological records, files from a year ago when I sought therapy after my miscarriage in the previous life. The most vulnerable, painful moments I had locked away were now laid bare in front of me. Tucked between the pages was a note written in Lily's unmistakable handwriting. If you don't want the entire hospital to see this, I suggest you resign. I crushed the note in my fist, but the trembling in my hands betrayed the storm brewing inside me. So this is your move, Lily? Digging up my past? That evening, I met Sophie at a cafe near the hospital, the files sitting between us like an unwelcome guest. She flipped through the papers, her brows furrowing deeper with each page. This is low, even for Lily. I leaned back, crossing my arms as I watched the steam rise from my coffee. I'm not surprised. I expected something like this. Sophie's eyes shot up to meet mine. Emily, if this gets out, people will start questioning your credibility. Some of them will take Lily's side. I smiled faintly, brushing my fingers along the rim of the cup. Let them. I didn't come back to this life to hide. Sophie hesitated for a moment, then nodded, determination flickering in her eyes. All right. Whatever happens, I'm with you. The next day, I walked into the hospital like I always did, head held high, but I could feel the weight of the envelope burning in my bag, a silent reminder that Lily was still pulling strings behind the scenes. As I passed through the hallway, I spotted Lily laughing softly with a group of doctors. Her eyes flickered toward me for a brief second, and I saw the subtle smirk tug at her lips. I didn't stop. I walked right past her. But Lily wasn't done. She leaned in, just close enough to whisper, "Don't push me, Emily." I'm not afraid to use that file. I paused, turning my head slightly to meet her gaze. Use it if you want. But if you think my past will break me, you clearly haven't been paying attention. Lily's smile faltered. Later that afternoon, I stepped into my father's office, Director Richard Chen. He sat behind his desk, reading through the same file Lily had sent me. He didn't say anything right away, his fingers slowly drumming against the leather cover. "Emily," he finally said, closing the folder. "Is there anything you want to explain?" I met his eyes without hesitation. "I've dealt with my past, Father. I won't let it control me anymore." He studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "I trust you, but you need to be careful. Lily may be desperate, but desperate people are the most dangerous." I smiled softly. "I know, but I'm ready for whatever comes next." 3 days later, I stood before the hospital staff at a special meeting. Lily's rumors had spread far enough. It was time to take control. I held the file in my hand, letting the weight of the moment settle in. "Some of you may have heard things about me," I began, my voice steady, "and I'm here to confirm that they are true. I did seek therapy a year ago. I went through a difficult time, but I came out stronger because of it." Whispers filled the room, but I didn't flinch. "Mental health isn't a weakness. It's part of being human. I'm not ashamed of my past, and I won't let it define me." From the corner of the room, I caught Lily's pale face staring at me in disbelief. "If anyone has questions, my door is always open, but I refuse to let lies and manipulation control this hospital." Silence. Then, a slow clap echoed from the front row. Sophie stood, applauding with a proud smile on her face. One by one, others joined in. Lily slipped out quietly, unnoticed by most, but not by me. Later that night, I was leaving the hospital when I spotted Lily waiting by the entrance, arms crossed. "You really have no shame, do you?" she spat, her voice low and bitter. I stopped in front of her, meeting her glare with calmness. "No, Lily, I just refuse to live in fear of you." She stepped closer, lowering her voice to a cold whisper. "You think you've won? I know things about you, Emily, and if I go down, I'll take you with me." I smiled, not because I wasn't afraid, but because I finally understood Lily's desperation. "You've already lost, Lily. That's why you're standing here trying to scare me." Lily's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. She simply turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows. I watched her go, feeling lighter than I had in years. Lily's departure from the hospital didn't erase the shadows she left behind. People moved on, but remnants of her influence lingered like a fading echo. Daniel, however, was another story. He tried to keep up appearances, walking the halls as if nothing had changed, but his steps were slower, his smile forced. Without Lily by his side, he seemed lost. "Emily, can we talk?" Daniel appeared at my office door one afternoon, his hands shoved deep into his coat pockets. I didn't bother looking up from my files. "If you're here to defend Lily, you're wasting your breath." He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "I'm not. His voice trailed off as he searched for the right words. I don't understand why you're doing this. You've changed. I finally glanced at him, arching a brow. What exactly did you expect, Daniel? That I'd stay the same after everything you and Lily did. He shifted uncomfortably. I know I made mistakes, but I thought we could put it behind us. I laughed, a bitter, quiet sound. Put it behind us? You left me to die in that fire, Daniel. Forgiveness doesn't erase that. Daniel flinched, his gaze dropping to the floor. I was blinded by Lily. I didn't see things clearly. I stood, crossing the room until I stood just inches away from him. And now that she's gone, you've suddenly regained your sight. Daniel opened his mouth, but I cut him off. Let me be clear, Daniel. I'm not interested in fixing things with you. The past is exactly where it belongs, behind me. For the first time, I saw real regret flicker in his eyes. Emily, we're done here. I gestured toward the door, ending the conversation before it could begin. 3 days later, the rumor spread faster than I expected. Daniel and Lily had broken up. Apparently, Lily ended things. She left the city. That's what I overheard in the hallway. But I knew better. Lily hadn't left out of kindness. She left because Daniel was no longer useful to her. Daniel was nothing more than a pawn, and Lily had finally discarded him. That evening, Daniel appeared at my door once again. Emily, I just wanted to let you know that Lily's gone. I nodded without looking up from my paperwork. I know. She said she didn't want to drag me down with her. I met his gaze with cold detachment. That sounds like Lily. Daniel hesitated, lingering in the doorway as if searching for something to say. Do you think there's a chance we could start over? I placed my pen down, folding my hands over the desk. Daniel, I didn't survive the fire just to go back to the same mistakes. There is no starting over for us. His face fell, but he didn't argue. I'm sorry, Emily, for everything. I watched him leave, the weight of his regret trailing behind him. A week later, the hospital held a ceremony honoring outstanding staff members. As I sat quietly in the back, listening to speeches, Daniel's absence felt noticeable. Sophie leaned over, whispering, I heard Daniel requested a transfer to another hospital. Guess he couldn't stick around after Lily left. I nodded. It's for the best. Later that night, as I left the hospital, I saw Daniel standing by the parking lot, staring at the city skyline. Leaving without saying goodbye? I called out. He turned, offering a small smile. I didn't think you'd care. I walked toward him, stopping a few feet away. I don't, but I know what it's like to feel like you have nowhere else to go. Daniel's smile faded. Emily, I wish I could go back and change things. I met his gaze, unwavering. But you can't. None of us can. The only thing you can do is make sure you don't repeat the same mistakes. He nodded slowly, his hands tightening into fists. I'll try. Goodbye, Emily. Goodbye, Daniel. As he walked away, I felt no sadness, no longing, just the quiet satisfaction of someone who had finally let go. I thought Lily was finished. But I should have known better. People like her never leave quietly. 2 days after Daniel's departure, the whispers returned. This time, the rumors carried sharper edges, cutting deeper. Did you hear? Emily fabricated evidence to frame Lily. Some say she tampered with the lab footage herself. Apparently, Lily's filed an appeal with the hospital board. She claims Emily set her up. I stood by the window in my office, staring at the city beyond the glass. Sophie burst in moments later, her face flushed with anger. Lily's really gone too far this time. I glanced at her reflection in the glass. I knew she wouldn't disappear quietly. Sophie slammed a folder down onto my desk. She's spreading lies again, Emily. And Daniel, he's supporting her. I smiled faintly, though bitterness crept into the edges of my expression. Of course he is. Daniel's nothing if not predictable. An emergency board meeting was called. The room was filled with tension as I walked in. Lily sat confidently at the far end of the table, her posture perfect, a picture of calm. Daniel sat next to her, avoiding my gaze. At the head of the table, my father, Director Richard Chen, called the room to order. Lily, you've submitted a formal complaint regarding the investigation of the lab incident. Can you explain your concerns? Lily stood gracefully, her voice smooth as silk. Yes, Director Chen. I believe the video footage presented during the investigation was altered. I leaned back in my chair, resting my hands on the table. You're suggesting I tampered with hospital security footage? Lily smiled slightly, as if pitying me. I'm not accusing anyone directly, but there are inconsistencies. Daniel finally spoke, his voice hesitant but supportive. I reviewed the footage with Lily. There are some gaps. It doesn't align with the timeline. I watched him carefully. So, he's fully under her control again. Emily, do you have anything to say in response? My father asked. I nodded, pulling a small USB from my pocket and setting it on the table. This drive contains the original footage from the hospital's main server, untouched. If Lily believes the footage was tampered with, let's watch this version. Lily's confident mask flickered for a moment, but she quickly regained composure. If that's what it takes to clarify things, I welcome it. The room fell silent as the footage played. There was Lily, walking into the lab, glancing over her shoulder, before pouring liquid into my equipment. As the video ended, Lily's pale face stood in stark contrast to her earlier confidence. My father looked at her, his expression unreadable. Lily, do you still believe this footage was altered? She gripped the table edge tightly. Daniel shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting toward Lily for answers. Perhaps there was a misunderstanding, he said, but even he didn't sound convinced. I stood, speaking before Lily could recover. This wasn't a misunderstanding. Lily sabotaged my experiment and nearly killed me. I think the video speaks for itself. Lily stayed seated, silent and fuming. After the meeting, as the others filed out, Lily approached me, her eyes narrowed with fury. You think this is over? She whispered harshly. I held her gaze, calm and unwavering. I know it is. She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a cold whisper. I know your secrets, Emily. If I go down, I'll drag you with me. I smiled, soft but full of quiet victory. Try me. You've already lost. Lily's lips pressed into a thin line before she stormed out of the room. Sophie joined me moments later, grinning. You handled that perfectly. Lily's finally cornered. I watched Lily disappear down the corridor. Cornered animals are the most dangerous. She's not done yet. Later that night, I was the last one to leave the hospital. As I stepped into the parking lot, I noticed Lily waiting near my car, arms crossed. You've made this personal, she said as I approached. I shrugged. It became personal the day you tried to kill me, Lily. Her eyes narrowed, but there was something else, something that looked like desperation. This isn't over, Emily. One way or another, I'll make sure you pay. I unlocked my car, opening the door calmly. Lily, you're already paying the price. I'm just here to collect. She didn't respond. Instead, she turned and walked away, her heels clicking sharply against the pavement. But I knew better than to think she was finished. I underestimated Lily's tenacity. 3 days after the board meeting, an envelope appeared on my desk, thick, unmarked, but far too familiar. Inside were copies of my psychological records, the same ones Lily had threatened to expose before. A note was tucked between the papers, written in her elegant, deliberate handwriting. Leave the hospital, Emily, or this becomes public. I ran my fingers over the pages, feeling the weight of every word. My past, fragile and deeply personal, laid bare. But this time, I didn't feel fear, I felt anger. That evening, Sophie sat across from me at a small cafe, her brows furrowed as she flipped through the records. She's really desperate now. I nodded, sipping my tea calmly. She's out of options. This is her last card. Sophie glanced up at me, her eyes searching. Emily, what are you going to do? If this gets out— I cut her off with a slight smile. It won't matter, Sophie. I'm ending this tonight. The next morning, I stood in front of the entire hospital staff during a quarterly meeting. The large conference room hummed with quiet chatter, but as I stepped up to the podium, silence swept over the crowd. I held the envelope in my hand, raising it for everyone to see. Many of you may have heard rumors about me, I began, my voice even. Today, I'm here to confirm them. A murmur rippled through the room. Sophie, sitting in the front row, watched with unwavering support. A year ago, I sought psychological help after going through a personal loss. I was diagnosed with PTSD. Gasps echoed faintly, but I continued without hesitation. This hospital saved me, not just physically, but mentally. I have no shame in sharing that I needed help. Lily stood near the back of the room, frozen in disbelief. Her hand clutched the strap of her bag so tightly her knuckles turned white. Mental health is not a weakness, I continued, and no one, no matter how desperate, can use it against me. I let the words settle before folding the envelope and tucking it into my jacket. If anyone has questions, my door is always open. Applause started slow but quickly grew louder. Lily slipped out quietly. Later that day, I found Lily waiting for me in the hallway outside my office. "You think you're clever, don't you?" she hissed. I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "Not clever, just tired of your games." Lily's eyes burned with frustration, but behind it, I saw something else. Panic. "You humiliated me again, but this isn't over." I tilted my head slightly. "Isn't it? Lily, you tried to blackmail me with something that doesn't hold power anymore. You've run out of moves." She took a step closer, lowering her voice. "I'll find something else. There's always something." I met her glare with a quiet, unwavering gaze. "Then keep looking. But understand this. Every time you strike at me, I'll strike back harder, and eventually, you'll have nothing left to lose." Lily's confidence cracked for the first time. "I know people in this hospital, Emily. They won't always take your side." I smirked. "No, but the truth will. And that's the difference between you and me, Lily. I've already won, because I stopped hiding." That night, as I walked through the hospital parking lot, I saw Daniel standing by his car, staring at his phone. When he noticed me, he hesitated before approaching. "I heard what you said at the meeting today." I kept walking. "And—" He followed, his voice softer than usual. "You were brave. I know Lily." He trailed off, guilt shadowing his face. "She crossed a line." I stopped, turning to face him fully. "Daniel, you chose Lily's side over and over. Don't stand here now and pretend you didn't know what she was capable of." He lowered his gaze, unable to respond. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," he murmured. "I just wanted to say I admire what you did today." I studied him for a moment before offering a slight nod. "Goodbye, Daniel. And good luck." It wasn't an olive branch, but it was enough to let him go. The next day, Lily's desk in the research department sat empty. A formal resignation letter appeared on the director's desk, but I knew she hadn't written it voluntarily. Rumors swirled that she was seen leaving town, but I didn't bother to confirm. She was gone. For the first time in a long while, I felt a quiet sense of peace. That evening, Sophie and I sat on the rooftop of the hospital, watching the sun dip below the horizon. "It feels strange," Sophie said. "The hospital seems quieter without her." I smiled faintly. "It's not quieter, it's just finally at peace." Sophie nudged me playfully. "So, what's next for Doctor?" "Emily Chen," I thought for a moment, letting the calmness settle in. "I rebuild, but this time, for myself." And for the first time, I truly believed it. The weeks following Lily's departure passed quietly, almost too quietly. For the first time, I felt the absence of chaos in the hospital halls. No more rumors, no more subtle sabotage, no more glances over my shoulder. It was, peaceful. But peace can feel strange when you've lived in the storm for so long. One afternoon, Sophie found me in the break room, staring out the window. "Earth to Emily," she teased, waving a hand in front of my face. I blinked, shaking off the haze of thought. "Sorry, I was just thinking." Sophie arched a brow, taking a seat beside me. "Thinking, or realizing there's nothing left to fight anymore?" I smiled softly. "A little of both." Sophie leaned forward, propping her chin on her hand. "You've changed, you know. I mean that in a good way." I met her gaze, sensing the sincerity in her words. "I had to. If I hadn't, I wouldn't be here." She nodded thoughtfully. "So, what's next? With Lily gone and Daniel out of the picture, do you just enjoy the calm?" I paused, then chuckled softly. "I think that's the plan, for now." Sophie grinned. "You deserve it." A week later, I received an invitation to speak at the hospital's annual seminar, something that, in the past, would have been unthinkable. Lily always occupied that space, commanding attention, but this year, I stood in her place. As I stepped onto the stage and gazed out at the crowd, I realized how far I had come. "Good afternoon, everyone. Today, I want to talk about growth, not just in medicine, but in ourselves." I saw Sophie sitting in the front row, smiling encouragingly. A year ago, I stood in this hospital under very different circumstances. I carried burdens that nearly consumed me, but I learned something important. We are more resilient than we realize. A ripple of nods passed through the crowd. Resilience isn't just about strength. It's about the ability to rise, even when we're certain we can't. As I spoke, I felt the weight of the past lifting, one word at a time. After the seminar, Daniel approached me, his posture uncertain. He had transferred to another department, but he hadn't left the hospital entirely. "That was impressive," he said, his voice softer than before. I offered a polite smile. "Thank you, Daniel." He hesitated, then sighed. "Emily, I know I said this before, but I really am sorry. I didn't see things clearly back then." I held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded. "I know, but we can't change the past. All we can do is make sure it doesn't repeat itself." Daniel smiled faintly, but I could tell he understood. "I hope things go well for you, Emily." "You too, Daniel." That night, Sophie and I celebrated over dinner. "To new beginnings," she toasted, raising her glass. I clinked mine against hers, feeling light for the first time in what felt like years. "To new beginnings," I echoed. As we laughed and shared stories, I realized I wasn't the same person who once felt powerless beneath Lily's shadow. I had taken my life back, and for the first time I felt truly free. The hospital felt different now, lighter, as if the weight of the past had finally lifted. I walked through the halls, nodding at familiar faces, sensing the subtle shift in how they looked at me. Respect, not pity, confidence, not doubt. For so long, I had fought to reclaim this life. Now it was finally mine. One morning, Sophie burst into my office, holding 2 cups of coffee. "Big day today," she grinned, placing 1 cup on my desk. I raised an eyebrow. "Is it?" She sat down, crossing her legs casually. "Don't play coy, Emily. The hospital board is officially approving your research project this afternoon. You're about to lead the biggest medical study this place has seen in years." I smiled, shaking my head. "It's still in the early stages, Sophie. There's a long road ahead." She leaned forward, smirking. "And you'll walk it. Like you always do." Her words carried a truth I couldn't deny. Later that day, I stood at the front of the boardroom, presenting my proposal to the hospital's senior staff. The project focused on advanced burn treatment protocols, an area I had become intimately familiar with. As I spoke, I felt the passion behind my words, the confidence that stemmed not just from knowledge, but from experience. Our goal is to improve recovery rates for burn victims, providing not only physical healing, but mental health support during rehabilitation. I glanced at my father, Director Richard Chen, who watched with quiet pride. When the meeting concluded, the project was unanimously approved. I left the room feeling something I hadn't in years: purpose. That evening, Sophie and I walked through the hospital's garden, the warm glow of the sunset casting long shadows across the path. "You know, Emily," Sophie said, tucking her hands into her coat pockets, "I think this is the happiest I've seen you in a long time." I smiled softly, gazing up at the sky. "It's because, for the first time, I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." Sophie nudged me playfully. "And without Lily breathing down your neck, I imagine life's a little easier." I laughed. "That too." 1 week later, I received a letter from Daniel. He had officially transferred to another hospital in a neighboring city. His words were short but sincere. "Emily, I hope you're doing well. Thank you for teaching me the lessons I was too blind to see. I've learned more from you than I ever admitted. Take care of yourself." Daniel. I folded the letter, placing it in my drawer. It felt like closing the final chapter of a book I had long outgrown. Months later. The research project progressed smoothly, my team expanded, and new faces joined the effort to improve patient care. I found joy in the work, knowing that what I was building wasn't just for the hospital, but for others, people who had once stood in the same fire I had survived. "Dr. Chen, we're ready to begin testing the new treatment model," one of the interns informed me during rounds. I nodded. "Let's move forward." As I watched the team work, I felt a quiet satisfaction settle in my chest. I had rebuilt my life, not as the person I once was, but as someone stronger, wiser, and unafraid. That night, standing on the hospital rooftop, I let the wind carry away the last remnants of doubt. Sophie joined me, handing me a cup of tea. "So," she said, "what's next for Dr. Emily Chen?" I smiled, watching the city lights flicker below. "Whatever I decide it to be,